In the pursuit of an ideal, how far would one go to obtain such? To uphold the pride of one's family, to establish peace and equality in an unjust world, to restore a dynasty sure to fall, their gaze cast upon the waxing moon, a magus ritual summoning heroes from myth and legend to fight alongside their summoner, each competing to have their one wish granted. Such kicks off the tale of Fate Samurai Remnant developed by Koei Tecmo, settling into the perspective of the adopted son of famed swordsmaster Miyamoto Musashi Miyamoto Iori, an apprentice whose talent and prowess is held back solely by the now peaceful times of the Edo period. But one fateful night is thrust into this fight to the death through the summon of Servant Saber. Witnessing the destruction this ritual is capable of, decides to fight alongside Saber as a waxing moon ritual master to protect this long fought for peace. And so the player assumes the role of Iori, exploring town to town to get a bearing as the ritual kicks up mystery across Edo. Here you get information from the townsfolk, complete tasks for various rewards, and potentially come across the consequences of becoming involved in the ritual. Whether roaming thugs, monsters drawn due to the ritual's influence, or pawns of enemy masters, thus enter the gameplay loop of a small-scale Musou JRPG blend. Each of these encounters are brief, but abundant with simple mechanics to follow, one of the more intricate being Iori's stances. Knowing only two at the beginning can switch between each with their own combat niche and combos, and as the story progresses will gain different types, each being increasingly more fun to use. Dealing damage or fulfilling certain conditions will imbue Iori with an afterglow. Once imbued, switching stances will give a unique temporary buff depending on the stance switched off of. For example, acquiring a water stance afterglow and switching off will buff attack speed, while an earth stance one will reduce stagger and damage taken. This adds a loop, giving motivation to cycle between stances for the most effective attacks. One ability that makes a game infinitely more fun is the riposte, an early game skill allowing you to counter attacks with the correctly timed evade. The timing can be a bit tricky at first, but once I figured it out, the gameplay went from a 5, maybe 6, to a high 8. This mechanic truly makes the gameplay as satisfying as it can be. However, perhaps not all of who you fight are as bloodthirsty as the nature of such ritual would have you believe. If you are familiar with Fate, the baseline setup will bear a resemblance. The early game, which I consider the first 2 chapters, follow a simple formula in terms of Fate worldbuilding and JRPG introductions. Though they are chapters I find hard to say are banal. The charisma and soul emanating from each of those you meet take what could have been a simple hand guiding you into this world, and turns it into a fairly interesting dive into those who participate. Passing conversation shows glimpses into their character, their own set of circumstances for joining the war, the dynamic they share with their servant, and hints towards a desire they hold deep within. I particularly loved Chung Changgong, Master of Archer, whose earnest pursuits of his passions and values is a standout. Just his presence is comforting, with the possibility of something deeper within his words drawing intrigue. His relationship with Archer is one of the mutual admiration for the other's ideals and histories. There's also Kaya, Iori's adopted younger sister, who never fails to lighten the mood with her upbeat cheerfulness, unknowing of the battles being fought in secrecy. But on the opposing side, a mysterious foreigner, a rare sight in Edo, Japan, whose elegant appearance hides a magus's nature. Chiemon, a walking, tattered corpse with eyes harboring a burning rage that extends to his own servant. Yui Shosetsu, whose vague intentions and unpredictable actions give a sense of intrigue. And of course, the one by Iori's side through all of this, Servant Saber, whose exuberant expressions and impulses belie a seated bloodlust, conflicting with oneself and Iori's wishes to keep bloodshed to a minimum. But shifting the subject to Iori, though he takes on the front of the stoic samurai trope, his multifaceted personality makes it easy for him to bounce off of others. A gentle yet steadfast warrior who may find trouble finding the right words to say, especially in situations that catch him off guard, but how he reacts gives a caring impression, able to quickly grasp situations as fitting for the life he has lived. With whomever, Iori's charisma creates a rhythmic flow with the plot's progression, a subtle self to highlight the personality and development of his surroundings. This is especially true with his relationship with Saber. Saber, as a warrior, sees himself far above Iori, not for his character, but strength. In fact, humans are something Saber loathes for their fragility. However, his subtle display of earnestness in his philosophy and swordsmanship gradually creates a bond over the rift between them. This trait of his also helps him grow close with the rogue servants. Servants not bound by contract to a master, but instead are anchored to and thrive off the land in which they are summoned. They are a spin on the Grail War concept, adding on to the relationships present and can tip the scales of the ritual. Some play little to mild roles, almost being there for fan service, while few are vital whether alongside or against Iori. But what the former lacks in story significance, they make up for by their sole presence being genuinely enjoyable. Their varied personalities add some flavor, especially in the early parts of the game through their side quests called digressions. Digressions also become available for other masters and servants to get a glimpse into the ritual's many perspectives. And through each side exists a lingering doubt. The nature of the waxing moon means only one will win. What's to say what lies at the end of an alliance isn't betrayal? How do you know their true intentions? Eventually, their blades will cross. The premise of this ritual is inherently interesting. Seeing people from all walks of life earnestly fight for a dream that may be unattainable otherwise. A fight that threatens the very life they have lived. With their ideal within their grasp, is the trade worth it? What morals will they have to give up in pursuit of such? All that matters is the execution of the characters and how they stand their ground in this fight to the death. And Samurai Remnant does this to an immaculate degree. Again, it is a slow burner with the first 2 chapters introducing the world and characters, taking its time as Iori and Saber investigate other masters, with not every endeavor producing the results they hoped for. However, from chapter 3 onward, the pace becomes a non-stop clash and conflict, unveiling the facade or inner suppressed self behind each and every master, as tensions grow tighter and tighter. What is it behind the mask that pushes them? What lies have they told others, told themselves to hold themselves as they do now? Even with Iori, from how some others view him, something about him feels off, incomplete. Every character is a mystery that, as they appear, hold their honor and desire within their blade. The characters are by far the strongest part and love each of them. There were a few whose shine felt dim next to the light of others, mainly Assassin and Caster. The former because he felt more like a plot device, underutilized as a character, and Caster because of the sheer potential that comes with his true name and a particular connection he has to another that goes underdeveloped. However, that range from deeply complex to simply enjoyable to see on screen. Seeing the actions they take as a ritual progresses builds such an intriguing and enjoyable narrative, to the point of easing one of the game's biggest flaws. The quest design. Run from A to B, fight enemies along the way, maybe fetch an item or two, and repeat. The progression of each quest isn't all too varied, being fairly simple to the point of repetitive, which the digression quests are especially guilty of. At times, it is shaken up by the strategy-centered spirit font conflicts. These blend a turn-based style territory capture minigame with the usual combat. The two mix nicely here, somewhat alleviating the repetitive standard gameplay. Despite the combat loop being satisfying and addictive in its own right, the quests stand on the shoulders of the narrative, and of course where all of this investigation leads to. As the ritual progresses, Iori will of course have his own encounters with servants, where there's no other choice but to fight head-on. In these otherwise near impossible fights, Saber stands and fights alongside Iori, being able to use special attacks with the affinity gauge, with the opportunity to fully control them mid-combat when the substitution gauge is full. This adds extra layers of dynamic and spectacle to each fight. When servants are involved, you can feel the difference in power whether playing as them or against them as Iori. The difficulty of these fights, playing on Sword Expert on my first and Sword Demon on subsequent playthroughs, was just right, if not perfect. Not once did I ever feel roadblocked by the need to grind levels. By doing the story, playing through digressions as they appeared, filling out the skill tree and upgrading equipment ever so often, the numerical difficulty, being health and damage, stayed the same, probably getting easier as new stances were unlocked, while the mechanical side became more complex. Though I will say, due to not having as enjoyable or effective stances, the early boss fights did go on for a bit too long. Though once I unlocked the fire stance, which was around the same time I got better at riposts, my enjoyment skyrocketed. In terms of mechanics, each boss was fairly well done. Their attack patterns can be challenging to get down at first, but by taking the time to observe and understanding the range and potency of their attacks, you can easily set up a chain of riposts to punish. The only fights that didn't feel as enjoyable were ones that relied on ranged attacks, essentially where riposte opportunities were limited. I do think there was some untapped potential with master and servant fights as well. They are a neat addition in concept. Having two bosses in one area leads to more caution with who to target and when to get those attacks in. You can't focus solely on the master, as their servant will intervene and attack from behind. In that aspect, it's a nice change of pace. However, the only difference in these scenarios is that they have one link strike when together, causing the slower approach to feel more tedious than the dynamic battles they could have been. However, both of these scenarios only make up a small fraction of the fights, and are probably a lot more fun on easier difficulties. Honestly, the boss fights were some of the most exhilarating and memorable moments, delivering some breathtaking character themes. And another to the list of badass Type Moon protagonist themes.
2.1 流 Miyamoto Iori なり
But surprisingly, gameplay-wise, it wasn't the combat I was most interested in. It was the exploration. The environment isn't all too reactive. People phase out of existence when you run into them. And yet, the bustling ambience of Edo's towns, Saber calling out in curiosity of a world so foreign to them, the clack of Waraji against the paved paths, The atmosphere is so serene. The visual and audio team made what could have been bland and mundane into one of my favorite aspects of the game. I ran around for hours, hardly progressing the story simply because it was relaxing. Haga Keita and Saisuke Shinoda made a beautiful soundtrack to go along with every inch of this game. Their tracks have such a range, fitting the era and backgrounds of each character. Passion can be seen in almost every aspect, and that holds true for the visuals as well. Though the models and average dialogue sequences aren't all too notable, it's really Rei Wataru, the character designer and artist for the 2D sprites, who did a great job at supplementing the characters' expressions where the 3D models lack. I mean, just look at Saber. Adorable. The cutscene animation is a different story, however. Every shot makes full use of color and scale to give a feeling of such grandeur. And for the noble phantasms, they're brimming with every bit of hype and weight you would expect from seeing them in action. Now, settling down into the depths of the character's heart, their past shown through fitting ukiyo drawings, holding weight within its simplicity and hard-hitting notes. The longer this ritual rages on, the longer Iori fights. Clashes and conflicts spew about Edo, continuing to grow in scale and stakes. But perhaps how it all concludes, in spite of the choice made, may be unfulfilling. There's all this build-up, all these choices made that while accomplishing in what they set out to do, leave many other threads left untouched. The full picture goes unrealized. After the climax, the stage is barren. At first, it may seem that these interesting ideas and characters end up just shy of their potential, plot threads seemingly abandoned, and so it is only logical to go to the ending left untouched. However, while going through the game once more, doing the newly unlocked digressions, things are different. Scenes that were cut short are now extended. Scenes that may have been seen in one light can then be seen the complete opposite. The true desires and reasonings which were once suppressed seep through the script. Slowly, through both these new scenes and digressions, some characters and events take an interesting turn in perspective, all the way until the once ignored ending is reached. In total, there are 4 endings. 1 joke end, 2 neutral ends that tie up any loose ends the other left behind, and a final ending. After completing the game once and getting to the finale, there is a choice that couldn't be made before. I do think it should be seen after both of the neutral endings, because this final one bolsters the thematic meaning to the previous 2, which may have seemed a bit hollow. There is debate as how to classify it, and for good reason. It does so much to conclude and bring meaning to many character arcs, going in a direction that only makes sense, but still shocking to see come to fruition. It's an ending that has really stuck with me since I finished it, solidifying Samurai Remnant in my top 3 Fate works. Made clear by its finale, coming to meet and know those who participate in the ritual, it's ultimately a story centered around the theme of balance within oneself, questioning where one draws a line between the want to fulfill one's desire and the fulfillment to ensure the world remains a better place. Does one valiantly fight for the duty they were born to or came to be in? or perhaps squander that duty to achieve a long-sought desire. There are those who abandon their humanity to achieve their long-sought dream, and those who suppress that desire to do what's best for the world. But is one right? Is the other wrong? Between desire and duty, where do you draw the line? Samurai Remnant is one of the best takes on the Holy Grail War in a while, containing the ideological clashes Fate is known for, while taking the Grail War concept and putting its own spin on it both narratively and thematically. The game really surprised me with the quality of its storytelling, art direction, and gameplay that carried me through 80-something hours without a minute of boredom. Which was a surprise, as when the game was announced, I was rather apathetic. I thought I will get to it at some point, but it doesn't seem all too interesting. However, as its release date approached, the more information that came out, the more I found myself excited for it. About a week before its release, I bought into it and was not ready for just how beautiful of a game it would turn out to be. With 3 playthroughs so far, I will gladly do it once again when the new difficulty comes out. I am curious though as to what the DLCs are going to offer in terms of playable servants and story. But until then, we will have to wait and see. If you are on the fence whether to try out this game or not like I was, I highly recommend it as a Fate fan. So with that, I hope you enjoyed. Thank you very much for watching. Later.